Last week, large protests erupted in Georgia after the parliament drafted a proposed law on transparency of foreign influence. The law requires NGOs to register as agents of foreign influence if they receive a significant amount of funds from abroad, although that does not impose any restrictions on their activities. The US and EU both criticized the law for its similarities to Russian and Hungarian foreign agents laws and warned that it could harm Georgia's ties with the West. Tens of thousands of people protested across the country from the 6th to the 10th of March, and the draft law was later disapproved by the parliament, as most members abstained from voting. Russia compared the protests to those of Euromaidan in 2014 in Ukraine and warned of the consequences. Georgian Dream, the ruling coalition that created this proposal, has accused the European Parliament, including their allies, the Social Democrats group, of separating the Georgian people from their government, a, quote, common Russian narrative, end quote. The protests in Georgia showed two things. First, there was a debate of whether Georgia could be considered a European country or not. Georgians consider themselves to be Europeans or at least the protesters considered themselves to be European, because we saw a lot of EU flags in those protests. On the debate of European identity, a while back, being European simply meant being born and or raised in the continent of Europe. Georgia is arguably a Western Asian country. But for the last decade or so, being European has taken on a more abstract meaning. It means being a country or a people in Europe, or at least close to it, that fight for liberty, sovereignty, democracy, equality, prosperity, etc. These values are not unique to Europe. There are other countries across the world that have those. Yet it is something that a wide majority of us have ingrained in our quotidian and take it, well, some of us take it for granted, others cannot, but the people of Georgia, judging by these protests, are at least European at heart. And also reminder that Georgia is a EU candidate member state. The second conclusion that I took from these protests is that Russia's warnings of the consequences of these protests clearly demonstrates their intentions with the war in Ukraine. If we look at what's happening in Georgia, Moldova, and what might be happening in the Baltics, if we are to go with the rumors, it is all a classic example of irredentism. Russia can change the colors of its flag and the names of the country, yet its fabric is weaved in this historic but baseless claim of territories, which has remained constant, causing a never-ending suffering to all the people who have faced this terrible fate of crossing paths with Russia. But it can end if we continue to help these lands preserve their sovereignty. The European countries don't have a perfect history, but the thing is, we have learned from our mistakes, and Russia obviously hasn't, because they continue on doing them. And that's why countries like Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova gravitate towards us. These are my thoughts on the protests. If you'd like to see more inconsistent uploads on video commentary on European affairs or something else, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I upload more frequently comments on like Twitter and Instagram. If you don't want to miss out on that, I suggest you give me a follow in those accounts. And I'll see you next time. God bless.